Hi there. DPR the man, that's who I am. This week's edition of Here's the Thing for April 2nd, 2014. Another 30 to 40 minutes of action-packed thrills and adventure and opinions on items that hit the news and may not be talked about a lot, but just an effort to show you how us regular people view ourselves as conservatives rather than beltway mannequins. Yeah, this week we're going to be talking about push in Ohio for the right-to-work laws and how that's going to be an issue in the upcoming governor's race. We're going to be talking a little bit about Common Core, the California Senate, and some unusual action that they've had to take recently, and of course a little further exploration into Barack Hussein Obama's legacy. You need to wonder what that's going to be. And another edition of the Institute for the Utterly Stupid. And, of course, at the end of the show, we always do our foray into the Constitution of the United States of America. Continuing education, if you will. For those of you who don't have the time to read it, I'll read it for you. So let's move right ahead. Well, first up, there's been a couple of issues in Ohio recently that have brought it into the national spotlight, if you will. Along about a year or two ago, had a little issue over a thing called Senate Bill 5. Senate Bill 5 was Governor Kasich and the Republican legislature's efforts to curb collective bargaining in the public sector. Now, there's a reason for that. Bottom line, trying to cut costs, trying to stop the bloated union dues and the bloated pension contributions that the state was involved in, and thereby being able to better afford public services. However, it failed. In Wisconsin it passed, and Wisconsin has a balanced budget. And Ohio is doing better than a lot of states, despite the fact that SB 5 failed. It passed the legislature, it got signed by the governor, and the voters said no. And that's the American process. That's the way it should be. Whether I agree with Senate Bill 5 or not is immaterial. The point is that the voters had their say and they did it the right way. Now, the issue is whether or not Ohio should be a right-to-work state. Now, you go down south, and most of your states are right-to-work states. There's a reason for that. One of those reasons is that traditionally the South was always agricultural rather than industrial, and you didn't have unions for farm workers. You didn't have unions for service people, basically, at that point. You had your truck drivers and so forth, but other than that, basically it was non-union work. And right to work simply means that a person can work for a company and not be forced to join a union if they don't want to. Now, up north here in the industrial Rust Belt and so forth, traditionally more industrial, traditionally unionized, heavily unionized. As a matter of fact, it's about as unionized as it can get. It's one of the reasons why there are so many heavily blue urban areas up in the north, in Michigan and Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in New York, and so forth, because the unions have a grip, if you will. Now, I worked for a union. I worked for the Teamsters for 12 years. And during that time, I had good benefits, good vacation, I paid very little in union dues, really $31 a month, something to that effect, which gave me all those hospitalization benefits and doctor benefits, not very many doctor benefits. That's another story. We'll talk about that later. But the point being, I didn't mind working for a union because I knew I was going to get a raise every year, and then they negotiate a new contract and so forth, and we get more raises, and things went on. My problem was that a lot of people that worked where I worked didn't do as much as I did and got paid as much as I did. Later on, when the economy started to get tight in the late 80s, the problem came up where the company was sold to Sherwin-Williams, which is a paint company. Nothing to do with the drugstore business. I worked for Gray Drug, and it was sold to Sherwin-Williams. Sherwin-Williams had no intention of keeping it, and every intention of selling it at a profit at some point in time, which they did, rather very successfully, I might add. That being said, the union was pushed into a position where they had to make concessions. Now, that didn't mean that any of us took a pay cut. What that meant was that every time a contract came up, we'd get a raise, and anyone who was coming in after that would start at the rate we were paid. So then we ended up with 3 tiers of workers, basically doing the same work for less money. And that became a problem. As time went on, Rite Aid bought the company, and still has it, of course. Rite Aid had 3 non-union warehouses. Now, granted, our warehouse turned out more work in one shift, 5 days a week, than their non-union warehouse turned out in 3 shifts, 5 days a week. But that didn't matter. Rite Aid had absolutely no inclination to deal with unions. Okay? They had Harrisburg, they had Nitro, West Virginia, and they had no intention of dealing with unions, and the union couldn't do a thing about it. They knew right from the get-go that we were going to get closed, and we got closed. So the union helped us, and the union couldn't help us anymore, and that was my experience with unions. I'm not saying it was good or bad, I'm just saying that was my experience with unions. From that time on, I never had a union. And I don't think I was treated any worse or any better in any other job than I was at Gray Drug. The only difference is, at Gray Drug, you had a grievance procedure, and I used it, and other people used it, and it was fair. There were times when things were done that shouldn't have been done, and they were called out, and they were stopped. And you couldn't do that in a non-union job. Now let's move ahead. Where are we now? Okay, Right to Work said, okay, here's when I went to work for Gray Drug, basically, I was told, you know, you've got 90 days, and after 90 days, you will join the union. If you don't join the union, then you choose not to work here. That's called a union shop. Okay? You can start there, you're on probation, and then in 90 days or 30 days, I forgot what it was now, I think it was 90 days, you were in the union. If you decided not to join the union, then you decided you didn't want to work at that particular establishment. Right to Work says you don't do that anymore. Yes, people still have the right to vote a union in or out of their shop, or their place of work, or whatever you want to call it, but they can't force anyone to join it. They can't tell you that you can't work there if you don't join the union. Now, is that taking any rights away from the workers? No, not really. You can't be pressured one way or the other, in theory, on paper. Is that taking rights away from the unions? Well, absolutely. What it does is it forces the union to have to compete, basically, for the workers, to make it worth their while to join the union, rather than them being forced to do so, and therefore the union has to work for its money. It didn't have to work for its money when it was subsidized by the Obama regime to keep the pension funds afloat, but that's another story. So, right to work laws. Basically, in Ohio right now, I mean, the manufacturing and industrial jobs have dropped dramatically. And I would say, if not, you know, tens of thousands of workers, maybe more, are working in jobs that aren't anything like what they had before. They're probably, a lot of them are working in service industries and so forth and making less. And to unionize those would, I don't know if that would be a good idea. I mean, the unions have a right to try, but the workers have a right to turn it down. And so it's always been that way. I don't see where right to work is any big change. Maybe in the public sector, but public employees have always been under a different set of rules than the private sector. So where are we attacking this here? Nonetheless, that's going to be a major issue in the upcoming gubernatorial election. Ed Fitzgerald, the current Cuyahoga County executive, using it as a stepping stone on his resume to try to be governor. He's well known up here, but he's not very well known down in southern Ohio. And he's trying to make a name for himself. And he's coming out against right to work. What would you expect from a Democrat? I mean, the unions fund the Democratic campaigns. And in Ohio, we're still a little bit behind the rest of the country in that regard. is that the unions still have a stranglehold on the Democratic Party in Ohio. So we'll see where that goes. But with inflation and rising costs, and unemployment rate in Ohio is actually down, 6.5, I believe, last I heard, which is not bad in the view of the way things are nationwide. But we also have to take into account that they may have not be counting the people who quit looking. So it's hard to tell. But I just thought I'd bring that up because it's something we're going to be keeping an eye on. I understand them, the voters turning down, Senate Bill 5. Like I say, it was due process. But as far as the right to work, I don't see any problem with it. An awful lot of people have non-union jobs anyway, so what difference is it going to make? And so we move along. And so we travel to Arkansas. A mother in Arkansas has expressed concern over her daughter's recent Common Core school assignment that asked her to remove and replace 2 of the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, of the Constitution. The team assignment stated that the Bill of Rights is outdated and may not remain in its current form any longer. Okay, this is the Independent Journal Review. All right. Now, this is a 6th grade history class. Now, I know that, when we were took history when I was young, we learned a little bit about government, obviously. We had to. However, we didn't really take a serious civics class until 12th grade. Now, is that good or bad? I don't know. I mean, children need to be aware of what's going on in the government, but at their age, they may not be ready to reason to the point where they can really figure it out. They pretty much do what they're told. And under the present regime, that's what they'd like us all to do. That being said, it said here, the mother said, after she brought it home and explained her assignment to me, it made me question exactly what she was being taught. Where I can see a class using critical thinking skills to modernize the words as to help them better understand the amendments, giving them an assignment to remove 2 and then add 2 with little explanation as to why is upsetting. Okay, now this is where the problem comes in, okay? Our children are being taught that the Constitution is obsolete. It's old, and old isn't good. We need something new. Part of the assignment here says there's been a lot. This is the way it was written to the children, given to them. There's been a lot of controversy lately surrounding the war on terror. Many Americans feel as though the Patriot Act is infringing upon our privacy and other individual liberties, while others feel protected by it. The government of the United States is currently revisiting the Bill of Rights. They have determined that it is outdated and may not remain in its current form any longer. Their aim is to ensure that our personal civil liberties and the pursuit of happiness remains guarded in the 21st century. The government has asked for input from experts on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You have been selected to participate in the National Revisited Bill of Rights Task Force, and you will be working in a small team with others who may or may not share your values and opinions. You have been charged with the task of revising and editing the Bill of Rights. Basically, what they're telling these children is that Congress can somehow change the Constitution on their own. No, that's not how it works. We talked about that last week, or the week before. Amendments are made by the approval of 3/4 of the states. And the states have to have it approved by 3/4 of each state's voters. I mean, it's not an easy process. In the coming weeks, we'll be going over all of the amendments to the Constitution made since the Bill of Rights, when they occurred. But they all had to go through due process. And the reason there's due process is because when the Constitution was framed, the federal government had to take into account their powers versus the powers of the states and include the powers of the people. We are a federated republic, not a democracy, a federated republic, which means representational government. Now, I'm not saying that the people in Washington right now are doing that great of a job of representing us. Okay, we've talked about that enough. But what I am saying is that in principle, when it comes to the Constitution, changes have to be made through all of the channels. It was set up that way so that if the Constitution was changed, there wouldn't be any civil uprisings, there wouldn't be any controversy, no bloodletting, no coup d'etats, no military takeovers, no dictatorships. It's done by all concerned parties. So again, Common Core. What is Common Core all about? Common Core is all about the federal government telling every school in this nation, how our children are to be educated. Telling the schools that all children are the same, all children have the same opinions, all children have the same learning capabilities, all children have to learn the same things in the same way. And don't tell me that's not the case, because I'm watching it happen. And I've talked to parents who are very concerned about how their children are suddenly behind when they used to be doing well, because there's such a race to get this information crammed down their throats so they can pass the tests. Okay, they have to pass the tests. Common Core says you have to pass the tests. That's how they monitor the progress of the school. And if the school doesn't have enough people passing the tests, well, then the school's in trouble. And the school can't be in trouble. So therefore, they're going to push Common Core. And our son goes to a parochial school. So don't think that you're going to get away from it by going to a non-state controlled school. There's no such thing. As long as Common Core is taking hold, there's no such thing. The federal government's got their fingers into everything. I heard someone complain about faith-based grants from the federal government for parochial schools, that the government shouldn't be funding private and parochial schools. One of the people up in Wisconsin was yelling about the voucher system. Well, I've got news for you, Spunky. They've already done it. And anytime the federal government gets their foot in the door, they're not going to leave. They're going to start to push obligations down the throats of those who receive federal funds. That's how the government grows. Industry's about growth. Government's about growth. The difference is government can print money and grow as much as they want, and industry has to live within their budget. So who's going to win in the long run? Unfortunately, at this point, government. But getting back to Common Core, as I said before, Common Core is going to be the death of proper education in this country. It's going to indoctrinate our children rather than educate them. It's going to teach them what the government wants them to know, which means they're not going to talk about UFOs. Sidebar. It's not going to teach them principles to live by or critical thinking. It's going to teach them to criticize people who think. And that's the bottom line, because DPR demand said so. Dateline, Washington. Stephen Olmaker of the Associated Press asks the following question. Republicans are the party of the rich, right? It's a label that has stuck for decades, and you're hearing it again as Democrats complain about GOP opposition to raising the minimum wage and extending unemployment benefits. But in Congress, the wealthiest among us are more likely to be represented by a Democrat than a Republican. Of the 10 richest House districts, only 2 have Republican congressmen. Democrats claim the top 6, sprinkled along the east and west coasts. Most are in overwhelmingly Democratic states like New York and California. The average income in a Democratic House district is about $1,000 higher than the average income in a Republican district, and part of the reason for that is because the Democrats also are very strong in poor districts. And the Democrats say that the party of the rich label is more about policies than constituents, so they're poo-pooing it. We've got a lot of money in our districts, but that's not important. Our policy is not to be rich. Okay. Republican Mitt Romney in the election declared, "We're not the party of the rich, we're the party of the people who want to get rich." Now, I don't see any harm in that. I'd like to be rich. I want to be rich. I didn't do that. Okay? I'd like to be rich. But Romney also made the famous 47% quote My job is not to worry about those people. I'll never convince them that they should take personal responsibility and care for their lives. That may have been a little cruel, and it certainly lost the election for him, because as it turns out, exit polls showed that the only income group that he heavily carried were people making over $100,000 a year. But the funny thing is that those people who make over $100,000 a year have more Democratic representation in Congress than they do Republican. So let's really quickly, rattle off the top 10 here. Number 1, the 10 richest House districts. Number 1 is New York 12, Representative Carolyn Maloney, Democrat. California 33, Henry Waxman, Democrat. New York 10, Jerry Nadler, Democrat. California 18, Anna Eshoo, Democrat. Connecticut 4, Jim Himes, Democrat. Virginia 8, Jim Moran, Democrat. New Jersey 7, Leonard Lance, Republican. California 12, Nancy San Pelosi, Democrat. New York 3, Republican Steve Israel, Democrat. And Virginia 10, Representative Frank Wolf, Republican. Okay, so, again, what does that say? Well, it says that there's a little bit of a dichotomy going on. The rich tend to vote for Democrats, and yet the Republicans want to get rich. And there's a dichotomy there. And it might explain a little bit of why the Republicans won't stand up to the Democrats on any of the issues lately, and why they're scourging the Tea Party and anyone who's conservative. I don't know. It's just a thought I threw out there because I saw it and I thought it was interesting. It's not about disparaging anyone, so to speak. It's just about the facts, things that you don't see much of, that aren't reported that often. Okay, let's move westward to Sacramento, California. Don Thompson, Associated Press, reports the California Senate voted Friday to suspend 3 lawmakers caught up in separate criminal cases after the latest one to be hauled into court refused to step down. The most serious house-cleaning action the chamber has taken in more than a century. Okay, what do we have here? Well, Democratic Senator Ron Calderon and Leland Yee, who face federal corruption charges. Democratic Senator Rod Wright, who is awaiting sentencing in a voter fraud case. Okay, they're being prevented, prevented from exercising any power of their office until the criminal cases against them have been resolved. Even so, they will continue receiving their $95,291 a year annual salaries. A year annual, yes, that's redundant. Senate President Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg of the Sacramento acknowledged the public criticism of the chamber, but defended the leadership and the integrity of the 37 senators who have not run afoul of the law that we know of. Okay, I'm not going to read the whole article. I have a tendency to do that, and there's no real reason to do that. Leland Yee, he's the biggest case of all, though. What he's up against is that he was running helping to run an illegal gun running operation, and yet he voted for gun control legislation. And I don't know, it's just rather odd. Let's see here. Accused of accepting more than $42,000 to provide introductions, influence legislation introducing an undercover FBI agent to an arms trafficker. And he was also known as Uncle Leland. Okay, so so I again, let's not dally on that for too long. Democrats. Okay, Daley in Chicago, Democrat. Tammany Hall in New York, Democrat. Cuyahoga County here in Ohio, Democrats. The Democrats get firmly entrenched. They are tax and spend, as a rule. And when they become firmly entrenched, they become firmly corrupt. It's been shown time and again how many democratically run cities have gone down the tubes. Detroit being the most recent example. What can I say? Cities with Republican mayors are more successful. Wisconsin, with a conservative Republican governor has a balanced budget. Ohio, with a Republican governor, is doing better than it has done under the Democrats. Cuyahoga County still has Democratic leadership, but presumably clean compared to what we had. I mean, virtually everyone who ran Cuyahoga County over the last several decades is now in prison, or about to be. The Daley machine up in Chicago, which basically still exists, it cranked out Barack. The Tammany Hall situation in New York, 100-some years, maybe 100 years ago, where the Democrats had a firm grip on all of the income-producing capabilities of New York City, and they still do. And New York City is a hotbed of insanity when it comes to government control over people's lives. California, tremendous taxes, and doggone near bankrupt. Under who? Under whom, I should say. The Democrats. Okay, so enough about that. Again, wanted to bring it to your attention, something you might want to look into. And so we move ahead to another commentary, short commentary. Let's see, this is Ricardo Alonso Zaldivar of the Associated Press. Reports as a roller coaster sign-up season winds down, President Barack Obama's health care law has indeed managed to change the country. Americans are unlikely to go back to a time when people with medical problems could be denied coverage. I heard a story about that, a gentleman who went to get cancer treatment, and as they were setting him up for chemo, he had stage 3 esophageal cancer, a pastor, and they were getting his chemo set up when a worker rushed in and told him he wasn't covered. And why? Well, he didn't bother to tell anyone that he had a heart condition before that. Wait a minute. Yes, he did. Okay, that's another story. All right, that being said, this article is a long article. I'm not going to read it all, but basically, in essence, it says that the Healthcare Affordable Care Act is doing what it's supposed to do. And that the problem is that you got a lot of states who don't want to expand their Medicaid programs. And it says here, nearly half the states are still opposed to or undecided about the law's expansion of Medicaid, the government's health insurance program for the poor. As a result, millions of low-income people who otherwise would have been covered remain uninsured. Okay. Well, here's what it is, okay? Many of the people who've signed up for Obamacare have signed up for Medicaid. We know that. They're playing it down. They haven't talked about it lately, but a large number of them are signing up for Medicaid who otherwise might not have. Does that make sense? Well, yeah, okay, I understand. Again, the country has the largesse to take care of its own. However, we get to a point where the taxpayers are supporting all kinds of people, and they can only support so many. Bottom line, people have to buy into the insurance company's insurance, if you will, through the Obamacare marketplace in order to support the program. And if they're not doing that, the program can't support itself. So tax dollars will end up being the entire support for the program. Also, if you look at Barack's constant extensions of deadlines, extensions of the business mandates, extensions of the individual mandate, what do we have? But we have constant putting off of all the new customers that were promised to the insurance industry when they wanted to bring the insurance industry on board with this, and the hospitals and the doctors. They wanted to bring them all on board. So they told them how much more business they'd have. And now Barack's taking it away. Because as many studies are starting to point out, the ultimate objective of the Affordable Care Act is to eliminate the private insurance industry. Now, I'll be the first one to say that the private insurance industry is largely responsible for the increase in health care costs. Why? Because when I first got health insurance back in 1975, okay, or was it 77? Well, anyway, when I first got health insurance, the whole ball game was about hospital care. The insurance was for hospital care. In the event of an emergency, in the event of a catastrophe, in the event of something big. It hardly paid for doctor services at all. I mean, it didn't pay for office visits. It didn't pay for normal go to the doctor to get your cold or flu or stomach taken care of or whatever. And I complained about that back then. I thought that was bad. Well, I was young. I didn't know any better. I thought I was entitled to it. Now everybody thinks they're entitled to it. They're entitled to it. There was one gentleman on Facebook who made a comment not long ago that said that health care is a public service. No, it is not. It never has been. It's a private service. It's something you pay for. But if the insurance company is paying for it, then nobody really knows how much it costs. So the insurance companies and the health care providers can get together and drive the costs up as high as they want, because they can always charge more premium. Okay, so in that regard, the insurance companies are evil. I can understand that. And somehow that might be able to be brought under control, but not the way they're doing it. Not by putting them out of business. You put them out of business, you give the healthcare industry absolutely no incentive to improve. Absolutely no incentive to buy new equipment, start new procedures, hire better doctors, pay the doctors more. No, doctors get paid too much. How much are you willing to pay someone who can save your life? That's the big question. You know, somewhere in there is a happy medium, I'm sure. But these are the kinds of questions we have to ask ourselves. And as Affordable Care Act progresses towards the single-payer system, which they all really want, we're not going to have that choice anymore. We're not going to be able to decide what level of care we want or can afford or are willing to pay for. Okay, we're not going to have that choice. The government's going to have that choice. Do you want the government to have that choice? Do you want the government to decide whether you're worth caring for? I'm getting older. That bothers me, because I won't be worth caring for. Well, my family thinks I am. I think I am. There might be a few other people out there who think I am. So the legacy is eluding Obama because people, deep down inside, people are scared out of their wits because they don't know where they're going. They don't know where they're going to end up. And the more afraid they get, the more likely the government is to step in and say, we'll solve it all, just give us all your money and we'll pay for your health care. Or so they'd like us to believe. And now it's time for the Institute for the Utterly Stupid. Well, this little tidbit comes from Katie Abercrombie from Politichicks TV. This week's inductee into the Institute for the Utterly Stupid, North Carolina Senator Verla Insko. During hearings on Obamacare last week, Senator Insko asked, what % of the prostate cancer patients are women? Okay. And the Duke University research scholar Chris Conover replied, I have no idea, as people in the room began laughing. I would guess 0. Well, apparently that's a problem for Senator Insko. After all, you know, men can get treatment for breast cancer, so why can't women get treatment for prostate cancer? Think about that for a second. My understanding is women don't have one. Well, thank goodness for Senator Insko's alerting us to this issue. Once again, women are treated differently by our society's institutions than men. After all, I am sure they would never consider denying a man a hysterectomy, would they? Moving right along. Yes, we're approaching the end of this particular version of the show, and we're getting into our foray into the Constitution of the United States of America, nearing the end of the main body of it. Article 6. All debts contracted and engagements entered into before the adoption of this Constitution shall be valid against the United States under this Constitution as under the Confederation, that being the predecessor, the Articles of Confederation, the predecessor to the Constitution. This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Basically says that the federal Constitution takes precedence over any state constitutions. State constitutions are free to operate as long as they don't violate it. The senators and representatives before mentioned and the members of the several state legislatures and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. That's Article 6, and that's all it says. It's basically kind of a wind-up of all the stuff ahead of it. You know, in the coming weeks, we're going to be going over each and every amendment, not necessarily in full print, unless it warrants it, but basically what has changed, you know, what came out later on that either wasn't in the Constitution or needed to be revised because of the times and the demands of the society at that time. So, again, the living document, the Constitution of the United States of America, allows for the powers of all the separate state governments and individuals in the country to have input within the boundaries. Tell Obama that. We are approaching the end of this episode of Here's the Thing. And on that note, I would be remiss if I didn't remind all the listeners out there what they need to do. You can visit Here's the Thing at the website, www.heresdathing.com. You can visit the show on YouTube and Google+. You can email us at hdt2010@roadrunner.com. And heresdathing.com has a Facebook page where you can comment on the posts or possibly put some things out there that I might want to post. So, stay with us. Give us your feedback. Once again, I remind everyone, you tell me what you're thinking, and I'll tell you why you're thinking. Well, we've reached the end of this edition of Here's the Thing. DPR the man, that's who I am. Estopiki Productions, along with WELB-DBJ Radio, has proudly brought you Here's the Thing. And in my own inimitable way, I'll say to you, have a good day, have a good week, have a good life. Come back and see us again next week for another edition of Here's the Thing. Remember, you may actually be a part of it.